All right. Thank Dr. Boynton for a very inspiring talk. I think it made us really think very deeply. So next, I'm going to uh, invite Dr. Seungho Moon for their response.
So in Buddhism canon, there is a story about a bird with a shared destiny. I grew up in Korea, and in Korean say 공명 지조. I don't know how to speak in Mandarin. So this is a story that a bird with two heads. I believe that some of you know the story. So during daytime, you know, uh, one head wakes up, and this bird eats juicy fruits, very nice food. At night, the other head wakes up, and the other side of the bird knew something happening during daytime. So at night, the other side of the head wakes up, and you know this bird knew what's happening during daytime. So in order to kill the other head, right, who always eats nice fruit, the other head decided to just eat poison. And guess what happened at the end? This bird died because although it has two heads, it's one body. So listening to Dr. Boyantin's speech and our current COVID-19 situation, this health issue becomes very politicized, that left, right, here and there. So I wonder how to have a sense of community, and I believe that Dr. Boyantin's speech is using literature and our imagination to talk about ourness and how to increase our sense of urgency toward mutual respect and openness and other elements. And I'm glad that Dr. Boyantin invited me, and I'm so honored to be work with Dr. Maxine Green during my doctoral program at Teachers College for a long time. And she talks about the importance of the aesthetic experience. And I wonder how to combine that with our anti-racist pedagogy. And Maxine, she uses John Dewey's term. And then can you move to the previous slide?
You can actually control yourself now.
Okay, so thank you. And she talks about the antonym of aesthetic experience is anesthetic experience. In medical field, anesthetic procedure is before surgery, you make your body numb. And John Dewey talks about aesthetic experience is to wake consciousness. So aesthetic is something to wake our numbness toward ourselves, our society. So I recommend you to read, Maxine Green's major texts. Actually, Dr. Boyantin introduces, Dialectic of Freedom, one of my favorites in 1988. And another book, Releasing the Imagination, is a great one that you can take a look at, how to approach this aesthetic experience, which is the antonym of an aesthetic experience. So Boyantin today stressed, citing Maxine Green, the need for imagination to open a space where it is possible to conceive of a better state of things. And I go back to Maxine Green's phrases to say, releasing the imagination is a discussion of an quote, emergent curriculum, the moral life and justice in the public space, unquote. So Maxine talks about imagination is to look things as if they could be otherwise. So thank you again, Dr. Boyantin, to give us some of the important literature novels that we can actually imagine different realities. So Boyantin, thanks for talking. Imagination can do more than point out problems. It can also help find the solutions. And I also add one more layer of, imagination helps create more open-ended, unanswerable questions. So now we live in a society to find this solution for problems. And I think that is the real problem, to believe what I believe is the solution. And imagination is a space to have open conversation and try to raise more unanswerable questions because our life is so complicated, and literature and works of art will teach us, how to empathize about people's lives and how to awake our consciousness toward indifference in other people's lives as well. So since I live in Chicago, when you get to the Art Institute of Chicago, this is iconic image of American Gothic by Grant Wood in 1930. So when I work with my students or other workshops, it's my preference, because of COVID, we cannot go to the museum as a group. But before COVID, we try to explore the museums and have some practices of how to combine this aesthetic experience with some of the anti-racist pedagogy. And now, although, COVID brought us lots of opportunities too, and our Institute of Chicago, for example, they do a great job to have more online resources available. And I believe that some of you can use this kind of activity too for your real teaching practices. So one of the discussions that I make is to have analyze and talk about this painting and this iconic image of one man. Actually, he's a dentist of Grant Wood, so he was the model of this painting, and Grant Wood's sister Nan is portrayed to the left side of this. And I ask some questions of what if Nan, the woman in American Gothic, is African American, right? Is Asian American? So we can bring in some different perspectives about the same object because people believe there is objective statement, but in reality, as Dr. Boyanton says, everything is political. Even interpretation is political. So what kind of different narratives are generated when we shift this woman or the man from a different racial ethnic group? So how do we create narratives differently out of this context? And thanks again for introducing, Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And it is one of my favorites too. And Dr. Boyanton introduced as a recommended reading list of Chiwa's Achibi's Things Fall Apart. So I wonder when introducing literature, how to juxtapose different narratives. Because Heart of Darkness, although Conrad's intention to show the brutality or some challenges of this, European colonialism, but still there are lots of elements of racist perspective from, 2020 perspective. This is classic, and how we can juxtapose different literature and different literary criticism to talk about this classic. And one of the major elements is Things Fall Apart. Achibi talks about from African indigenous perspective, how to rethink the heart of darkness. And I introduce you all how to juxtapose literature to see the same thing differently. So Dr. Puente, thanks for introducing some of really important high standard values like mutual respect, open-mindedness, selflessness, and other virtues. And I like your, highlight to say all spaces of possibilities are biased. So now I'm reading Judith Butler again, and for this COVID situation, note toward the performative theory of assembly is really stood out. So I recommend you to study this one if you're interested. So Judith Butler challenged the meaning of people when not all human beings are recognized equally. We believe that everybody is created equally, but in reality, it's not the truth. She uses the notion of precarity, that the biopolitics of race and gender exclude a certain group of not included in the frame of we or people. We keep saying, oh, we are the people, right? We are the same. But she challenged the questions of when you refer to we or people, who do you mean by? This is a really crucial question. So the Black Lives Matter movement, continues due to police shootings, right, to unarmed Black bodies in 2020. It's in the United States, it keeps happening from the news. So according to Butler, some people are not regarded as a livable life for a human being. So the frame of recognition varies according to country of origin, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and other political statuses. So this is my question, where and how does imagination play a crucial role to advance fundamental virtues such as respect and open-mindedness when no neutrality and objectivity exists in political decision making? So I always go back to this political question because conversation is really important, right? Consultation is really important. But what happens when nobody wants to show up, right? So we cannot force anybody to come to the meeting that different political views are really conflicted. So I, when I was reading Dr. Boyanton's presentation and when I was thinking about the title of my discussion talk, I was really somewhat hopeless. Hopeless means by, well, I teach how to promote, mutual respect, open-mindedness, selflessness, and there is a hopelessness of, how to invite people who totally have different perspectives, right, of mine. And I'm not saying that my perspective is the right one, but at the same time, how to engage in difficult conversation with the people who don't share, similar values. So I'm kept contemplating on this topic because it's my personal and political and philosophical question of how to really sit down together with the people who have different perspectives. I know that it's not easy one. So as a ending, well, although I have, it's the kind of oxymoron of hope of hopelessness. I'm still very hopeful out of this hopelessness situation because this is the motivation that we live together. And this is an example that how I engage in conversation with people with the use of this aesthetic experience and anti-racist pedagogy, for example. And I was fortunate to work with Illinois Judicial College. This is a professional development group for judges and clerks and other probation officers in the state of Illinois. And before COVID and this political unrest, there were issues of how to include diversity, equity, procedural justice in legal system. So I was honored to be invited as one of the invited faculty members and to teach this concept of mutual respect, multiple perspectives, and fairness and equity. We closely worked with 3 museums in Chicago. One is the Art Institute of Chicago and the Chicago History Museum and the DeSable Museum of African American History. So out of this 3-day workshop, I try to engage in this aesthetic experience and promote anti-racist pedagogy. So I'm gonna share this one in addition to Dr. Boyanton's introduction to user literature and how to use art, works of art, and artifacts to talk about this conversation about very tough and challenging topics. So the first one is Remington's The Advanced Guard, and this is a really famous painting in the States, at least, to depict this brave man who was shot. And in this painting, we don't know who really attacked this white man. But there, we can easily assume from this context, there are indigenous people in the war during the during that West invasion. So we talked about this painting, and also it was interesting at the gallery. This painting is juxtaposed with this statue that a dad is teaching how to use an arrow for this indigenous Native American boy. So the predominant discourse about the advanced guard is really focused on this white man and how we can generate a different conversation with the use of this context, what's happening with this painting. So, we may enjoy Remington's The Advanced Guard from a brave cowboy narrative and show empathy for this man who was shot in the desert. So literally we asked participants to see the advanced guard from indigenous people's perspective and analyze cultural and political elements embedded in the painting. So we asked whose perspective is highlighted in representing this narrative. In what ways are other narratives such as indigenous people's voice are omitted or sometimes distorted? So ultimately, aesthetic experience and art-based inquiry helps rethink the myth of neutrality in decision-making processes. And the second image is really provocative for me, at least. Before COVID, Chicago History Museum had a really fascinating exhibit, American Medina. So people don't know how Chicago is the center for Muslim communities. So Minnesota is called Mecca and Chicago is called Medina among Islamic communities in the United States. So this is a photo during the demonstration that, this is really small, but you can see the backside of this photo. There are, white men and they are from very conservative Christian group. And it says only Jesus, bleeded for us. So it's a very protective version of, very Christian centered understanding about the world. And I really like this painting because this woman with, a scarf, and she's smiling and making a peace sign and make fun of them. So I'd love to use this painting as a way that, there are multiple ways to look at religion and spirituality, but at least in the US, it's a very Christian-centric country. So how we can bring in different perspectives to look at this COVID-19 and the political issues, even election in November, from this religious conflict. And the third one is, KKK, this costume, and actually the DeSable Museum of African American History, they have original artifacts. Every artifact are from original, and this robe is definitely original one. And on the right side of this image, there is KKK, going to their ceremony, right? And bringing a daughter, she looks like less than 5 years old to the site. And again, how to use this kind of artifacts and works of art to awake people's consciousness about social injustice and racial diversity. So this is what I want to add on top of Dr. Boyentin introduced us the importance of art, literature, and aesthetic experience, and hopefully you get some of the ideas of how to extend our conversation about anti-racist pedagogy and how to use art to talk about it. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Seungho. So here we have some questions. So I'm going to just pull one question first so you can start to respond to it. Hold on for a second. All right. This is indeed a very heavy topic, and also how can we, hold on, let me see. There is one question here. Let me find out that one question first. Okay. Okay, so maybe there is one question here. Said after people imagine collectively as a community, as a society, as a world, we might get a blueprint, but how to make this blueprint more convincing for people, how to supplement this blueprint and make it a belief. Basically, how to make people believe your blueprint. Okay, maybe two of you can respond to that.
Yeah, I did actually see that one. What I would say, in all honesty, is the process of consultation is, in fact, that's how you do it. The reason that it has to be a consultation among people is because it's not like I'm going to tell you what we need to do, because that won't work. We have to make that kind of decision together. So if we can do that, if we can consult together and arrive at a discussion together, and if you're interested, there have actually been, actually, I need to thank Dr. Moon. He's actually the person who introduced me to Maxine Green, but there are lots of other philosophers as well, who've talked about the way in which working together, basically, in talking together, is how we're going to create what we understand to be true, basically. So what we believe, in a sense, grows out of these conversations. So the assumption is that no one is telling us what we have, telling everyone that this is the way to do it, and then you have to convince them. We're all coming together to try and decide together, what is it we think is important? What is it we think we need to do? So that would be my first response, at least.
Okay, so you don't have to convince people. You at first you have to just through like keep talking and the conversation. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, the idea is that you need to convince people because you made the decision and they didn't. The idea here is, let's change that whole way of approaching things. Let's make the decision together.
I see. Okay. Again, basically consultation, right?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Seungho, you want to respond to that?
Well, I want to add what Dr. Boynton says in terms of imagination is not something daydreaming.
Right. Okay.
There are different versions of imagination, from, say, poetic imagination, right, social imagination about different society, and she also highlights political imagination and what kind of actions we can take. And for me, having one version of dream or imagination, I think that is more risky and dangerous, because it can be occupied by some dogma or one person's belief. And how to have more shared information among the community, and how we can have a sage leader who provides all information available with the use of imagination, and let people decide out of consensus. I think that is the one version of political imagination and the meaning of democracy, that you should be informed fully, and you have to invite people who have different perspectives and ideas. And then as a community, let's decide what's the most important, what's the most contributional at this point, which is not a fixed format, but more open-ended format.
It sounds like both you are talking about the most important thing about imagination or through consultation is to, first of all, we needed to get rid of the idea I versus you, or we versus you, and then think about we are together. It's not my idea or your idea. We are all, like, through the discussion, co-building it together. Is that like what you're talking about?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so there are several more other questions. Maybe you can each, let me see our time. Okay, we got like 5 more minutes. Maybe each of you can pick one question to respond.
If we can find them.
Okay, are you able to see the screen?
Oh, that's what you're putting up there. I see. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. Let's see. Oops.
Okay.
Well, let me start with what is there's number 2.
Yeah.
Because that is, I think, a key question in terms of what I'm talking about.
Right.
Is that, again, and again, I think here the question is, what's the difference between imagination and illusion? And I think here again that looking at the way artists really work is actually very helpful, because people have weird ideas about how people do artistic work. They think that you sit around smoking cigarettes and drinking, beer or something, and then you have crazy ideas, and that's how you create something. But that's not what happens.
Right.
What happens in reality is an artist sits down with an idea, and then they work on it, and they keep working on it, and they work some more on it. It is an amazingly intensive, long-term, and disciplined process. And part of why it has to be that way is because the imagination, the artwork that you produce, will be useless to you and anyone else if you don't really make it something that, for lack of a better term, works, basically. So even though you're imagining something that isn't real, you have to make it, as I said, something that has been imagined thoroughly and carefully. And if you do that, it's not illusion anymore. It's not whimsy. Because with illusion or whimsy, we're talking about simply, things that you sort of throw off the top of your head. And it's true. What you imagine may not be real. It may, in fact, be impossible, but that isn't what counts. What counts is that you have created a vision of something that is different, and that will, no matter how impossible it is, have an impact on the real world. I guess one of the obvious modern examples is the phenomenon of Harry Potter. Here we have an imagination that could never be real, but it clearly speaks to the modern world in very many ways, actually. Her vision of the wizarding community is a vision of what she would like to see in the world, and also what she doesn't want to see in the world, right? So even with the most outlandish imagination, if it's been imagined carefully and thoroughly, will still be able to speak to reality. And that's why it's different from simply whimsy or illusion.
All right. So I have a quick question about the relationship between reality and imagination. So can I say like imagination is something between the realities? So in order to imagine, you have to build upon the reality. And then through the imagination, then you are able to kind of reshape or rebuild the reality. If you just imagine without thinking the possibility of turning it into reality, then is not that useful based on your talk today. Is that right?
No, I wouldn't quite agree with that. That's kind of what Hannah Arendt argued, actually.
Okay.
And I respect her argument, but I think she's mistaken in that, as I said, it is my opinion that, humans don't, the notion that we imagine things that have absolutely no connection to reality is simply false. We're not that good, to be honest. A human who could do that would be remarkable in many ways, but we can't. All of our imaginations in the end tie back to reality somehow. That's just the way it is.
Okay, so I think that's what I'm talking about. I think what I'm
but
talking
we do
about
it not because we have to, not because we're worried that it won't otherwise, because that's what we are. That's the nature of what we are and how we imagine. But it's important in my mind not to put that forward as a limit, because even things that I said that don't appear to have anything to do with reality, in fact, are always approaching reality. The imagination never veers off in the way that people seem to fear it can. It can go in bad directions. Yes, it can be dangerous, but not because it's going to leave reality behind. Quite the opposite. It's dangerous because it keeps moving toward reality. And if you imagine something that can be harmful, then yes, that can be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Let me quickly add something. For me, imagination is how to dismantle our taken for grantedness about the realities.
Okay.
For example, Maxine Green, she gives many examples of, in the US, it's very segregated. So when you look at playgrounds that, kids are just hanging out, affluent neighborhoods playground is quite different from playgrounds that underrepresented communities kids are, spending time together. Mm-hmm. So when you look at this very dangerous playground equipment, how can you use your imagination to imagine different realities of how to change slides and swings differently that we can protect our children's health and the community's well-being. So I believe that imagination is something, literature and works of art will definitely help us to just, get out of our existing boxes of reality, our own realities and our, taken for grantedness, and how to look at the same thing from different, imagined realities. And I look at one other chat room, and my personal interest is how to dismantle taken for grantedness about Eurocentric perspectives about democracy,
Right.
community, and self-other. And it is always underestimated of other indigenous knowledge and different cultures' richness. For example, we are talking about how to go back to some of the Asian rich culture and tradition that really value, and that's the reason that I share this, a bird with a shared destiny. And for me, it's much easier to talk with my Asian community and Asian friends about this concept that we are one. We are not individual separate body. But it takes time for me to introduce this concept to my friends who are very immersed into Eurocentric perspectives, and I value my choice, autonomy, it's my individual right. So I wonder how to bring and move forward some of the traditions, non-Eurocentric traditions, to imagine different realities amid this COVID and our upcoming future.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like I wanted to thank you, Dr. Moon. Actually, you raised some really, you have a way of putting things that is very good, I think, and it raises some very good issues that I didn't talk about. But in terms of this question we're asking, actually, one of the quotes I almost used but didn't in the talk was from Frederick Jameson. And Jameson, if you're not familiar with him, is most famous as perhaps the most influential American Marxist, actually. And one of his comments very early in this book that I mentioned, he says, referring to the modern capitalist system, what is crippling is not the presence of an enemy, but rather the universal belief, not only that this tendency is irreversible, but that the historic alternatives to capitalism have been proven unviable and impossible, and that no other socioeconomic system is conceivable, let alone practically available. In other words, what is truly crippling is that we get locked into one way of seeing the world and don't think there is any other way of being. And so I think that's, I think Dr. Moon put that very well. That's part of why the imagination is always directed at what is, because imagining what is not is always, at least implicitly, a critique of what is.
Hey, wow, fascinating discussion. I definitely learned a lot today. So I think through the talk and also through the discussion and the Dr. Moon's discussion, I have a very learned two things. I think first, number one, in order for us to imagine collectively, the first step is actually to build a trusting community or relationship together where we can really all accept each other, care for each other, and be open to each other, respect each other, listen to each other, understand each other. And then the second step is we can all really imagine together, imagine what is the possibility, and imagine the alternatives, and imagine what we can do and rebuild a better world together. All right. So thank you both very much for a very inspiring talk, and thank all the audience for your participation and listening. And before we end, I'm going to make a quick announcement for our next week event. For next week, we're going to have Dr. Yubo Zhang, our Vice President of SAEI. She will be giving a talk about distance education in the era of pandemic, challenges and opportunities. Okay, and also very happy to share with you all today one of the education guru and also my role model and also the AERA fellow. Currently is the Dean of School of Humanities and Social Science, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Dr. Shi Tao Fan will be joining us as the discussant. So I'm really excited. So here's the introduction about Dr. Yubo Zhang. And also joining Dr. Yubo Zhang, we will have two colleagues from her, company, Dr. Mac Marcel, and will be joining us, and also Dr. Jungan Agawel. I needed to check if I pronounced her name correctly. All right, so that's going to be a really exciting talk, and it's also a very timely talk because right now, because of the social distancing and we cannot, resume a lot of school activities, and how can we turn this into an opportunity for the online education. And also we're going to have their opening performance by the South Lake High School chorus again. It's called Standing in the Light. All right, so thank you all very much. This is going to be our future talks, and I look forward to see you again next week. And I want to make one more announcement, because this event is also co-sponsored by the SAERA SIG 171, and Dr. Seungho Moon is the current chair of the SIG. It's Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and education. I strongly encourage you to scan the code and join the AEI, joining 171 SIG, so we can continue to have this kind of a stimulating and inspiring talk in the future, dialogue together. I also want to thank all the volunteers for the really hard work and dedication to make this event possible. All right, with that being said, thank you very much, and have a good day for all the people in the US. Have a good evening for all the friends in China. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
我们都是地球村里的村民，我们是教育创新的先锋，我们咫尺千里，豪气万丈啊，用爱滋润干渴的心盆。我们虽然来自世界的各地，我们却怀着同一个梦想。我们携手共进，鹏程远征，我们用爱的力量改变世界。